Most people imagine serial killers as mysterious, quiet, hidden, unknown. Ed Kemper wasn't like that. In fact, he told investigators almost everything. And the wild part is, if you met him on the street, you probably wouldn't think twice. The story begins with this guy. His name is Edmund Kemper, and he was 25 years old when everything started to come to light in the early 1970s. He lived in California. But before we get to the crimes, you have to understand something about Ed. Because even as a kid, something was off. Really off. He was an unusually large child. By his teenage years, he was already over 6 feet tall. But physically growing up wasn't the issue. It was what was happening in his mind. He had a difficult relationship with his mother. He always felt controlled, humiliated, and constantly belittled at home. And that resentment just kept building. Now, most people deal with anger. They move on, they leave home, they cope. But not Ed. He started fantasizing. Dark fantasies. Violent ones. And those fantasies would eventually stop staying in his head. They started turning into reality. Because one day, Kemper got into an argument with his grandmother in the kitchen, and the argument got heated up. He left, got a rifle, and while his grandmother was not looking, he shot her. After that, his grandfather returned home shortly after. Kemper waited, and then shot him as well. And unfortunately, they didn't make it. After killing them, he had a chilling reaction. He didn't immediately call for help. Instead, he interacted with the situation for a short time, before eventually contacting his mother and telling her what he had done. She instructed him to call the authorities, which he did. When police arrived, he cooperated fully and admitted everything. Because of his age at the time, the legal system treated him as a juvenile, and he was sent to a psychiatric facility instead of adult prison. And that should have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. Here's where things get even more unsettling. Because instead of being fixed in any way, Ed Kemper became something else entirely. He became calm, cooperative, polite. Doctors actually considered him intelligent, articulate, even helpful. And eventually, he was released back into society. Now imagine that. A man who had already killed before, walking back into the world, and nobody really knew what was about to happen next. After his release, Kemper moved back into California and tried to live a normal life on the surface, keeping to himself, trying to function in society. But behind that normal life, something restarted. Because one day after he was released, Kemper encountered a young woman. Her name was Mary Ann Pessy. She was a college student. She was trying to get around town. Ed offered her a ride, which she accepted. He drove her to a more isolated area where he carried out the murder. He disposed of the body separately from where she was killed to avoid immediate detection. He didn't stop there. He kept on attacking young women around Santa Cruz area. Kemper kept using situations like this repeatedly. Simple encounters, moments of trust, and then those moments turning fatal. Now here's where it escalates. After that, Kemper targeted another young woman named Aiko Koo, a 15-year-old student. She was hitchhiking. He offered to drop her off. He picked her up, drove her to a remote area, and killed her. Then he hid her remains separately from where she disappeared to further conceal evidence. And just like that, another person gone. Another case added to a growing list investigators still didn't connect to him. But Kemper wasn't stopping. At this point, something inside him escalated further. He began repeating the same cycle. Meet someone, gain trust, drive, and then kill. One of the most well-known victims was Cynthia Shaw, a young woman who was also picked up while hitchhiking. He drove her away from populated areas. The situation escalated into an attack once they were isolated. He killed her and later disposed of her body in a way meant to delay discovery. Now here's where things get even stranger. Because while all of this was happening, Kemper was also interacting with police. Sometimes casually, sometimes even stopping officers to ask questions about the investigation. And nobody suspected him. Because in their eyes, he didn't fit the image. Now, after multiple victims, Kemper's behavior shifted again, and this is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Instead of continuing indefinitely, he stopped. Not because he was caught, but because he decided to end it himself. And then he did something even more unbelievable. He picked up a phone and called the police. And what he told them wasn't a vague confession. It was detailed. He told them who he was, what he had done, where evidence could be found. And as detectives listened, they slowly realized something chilling. They weren't interviewing a suspect. They were talking to the killer. Now here's the part that really shook investigators. When Kemper was brought in, he didn't resist. He didn't deny. He didn't play games. He talked and talked and talked. He described the crime step by step. His thinking, his process, his mindset. Not with emotion, but with analysis. Almost like he was describing someone else's life. And the more he spoke, the more investigators realized this wasn't going to be a simple interrogation. It was going to be a full confession. Because Kemper didn't just admit guilt, he explained everything in detail. Now eventually he was charged, tried, and convicted for multiple murders, and sentenced to life in prison.